All right, let's dive into this book. Everyone keeps talking about uh, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Every entrepreneur I know says it's like the Bible.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those books that gets passed around.
And he doesn't mess around with like theories or frameworks or whatever. It's all about, his real experiences as a founder and CEO.
It's kind of like he's sitting across from you and saying, "Look, this stuff is tough, but here's what I learned. Maybe it'll help you too."
And he's definitely been through some stuff. Just imagine growing up in Berkeley during the 60s and 70s. That whole mix of hippies and activists and people from all walks of life.
I think that upbringing really shaped his whole approach. Like being exposed to all those different perspectives from such a young age. It comes up again and again in the book. He's always talking about how important it is for leaders to seek out diverse viewpoints to help them see the bigger picture.
And that makes me think, are we actually doing that ourselves? Like, are we surrounding ourselves with people who challenge our assumptions and offer different perspectives?
Right, because it's so easy to just stay in our own little bubbles.
He tells this crazy story about when he was 5 years old. He was hanging out with his brother's friend, and the friend dares him to, like, harass this black kid using a racial slur. It's a pretty intense situation for a 5-year-old to be in?
Yeah, and instead of doing what his brother's friend wanted, Horowitz just runs home terrified. And he talks about how that decision, that choice to be courageous, even though it meant running away, actually led him to meet his best friend years later.
It's wild to think about how one small choice can have such a huge impact. Like, what if he had gone along with it? His whole life could have been completely different.
Totally. And that whole experience definitely influenced his views on, well, on everything, really. Like not judging people based on surface level stuff and really trying to understand where they're coming from.
He talks about this other example that really stuck with me about how, like, a new rap album or a political policy would be this huge deal for the football team, but barely register in his calculus class.
It just shows how everyone sees the world through their own lens based on their own experiences and background.
Exactly. And for someone in a leadership position, I mean, that's a huge thing to remember.
Absolutely. You can't just assume everyone's on the same page or sees things the same way you do.
So are we even asking ourselves, who am I not hearing from? Whose perspective am I missing?
Such an important question. It's about building a diverse team, not just for the sake of checking boxes, but because you actually want those different voices at the table.
You could have a room full of people who look completely different but all think the same way. And that doesn't really get you anywhere.
Exactly. You need people who are willing to challenge you, to push back, to offer alternatives, even if it means disagreeing with the group.
Okay, so Horowitz's journey of seeking out different perspectives takes him to Silicon Valley. He starts talking about falling in love with Silicon Graphics, SGI, this company that was like the king of computer graphics back in the day. What was it about SGI that really caught his attention?
I think it was a combination of things. For one, SGI was doing groundbreaking work. Their technology was used in everything from Hollywood movies to scientific research. And two, he was just drawn to the brilliance of the people there. They were pushing boundaries and constantly innovating.
He definitely had that starstruck feeling working at SGI during its golden age. But then he joins this other startup, NetLabs, and things take a turn. It turns out to be a total disaster. What happened there?
Well, it was a classic case of what he calls professional management. The founders were pushed out, and these VCs brought in their own team to run the company. And, well, let's just say they didn't really understand the product or the vision.
It's interesting you bring that up because there's this ongoing debate about founder control in the tech world,
Yeah.
right? Like, who really gets the company and who's best suited to lead it?
Yeah, it's complicated, for sure. But for Horowitz, this experience solidified his belief in founder-led companies. He saw firsthand how bringing in outside management who didn't understand the core of the business could just completely derail it.
It's like they were prioritizing short-term gains over the long-term vision, which is kind of a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and they ended up alienating the team and damaging the company culture in the process.
So that brings us to Netscape, where Horowitz finds himself right in the middle of the internet boom.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that they weren't initially focused on the open internet we know today, right?
Yeah, I know. Their big idea was this thing called the information superhighway. And the whole thing was supposed to be proprietary. Like, corporations would control access to information and charge for every little thing.
It's hard to even imagine that now. Like, paying to visit every website.
Yeah, their eventual pivot to the open internet was a pivotal moment in tech history. It literally changed everything.
And think about it, we're still using Netscape innovations every single day. JavaScript, SSL, cookies, all of that came from them.
Totally. And even though they ended up selling to AOL, partly because of the pressure from Microsoft, you could argue that they still won in a way, because they shifted developers away from Microsoft's platform and onto the open web.
It's like they planted the seeds for the internet ecosystem we have today.
And all of those experiences, all those lessons learned, led him to his next big adventure, LoudCloud, a company that would push him to his absolute limits.
And that's where things get really interesting. LoudCloud launches right smack in the middle of the dot-com crash. Talk about bad timing.
Yeah, it was a trial by fire for sure. Suddenly, he's trying to convince investors to put money into this cloud computing company when the whole tech world is imploding.
It's like everyone thought he was crazy. Cloud computing, what is this guy talking about?
But somehow he managed to pull it off. It's incredible when you think about it. He had this unwavering belief in his vision and managed to convince others to believe in it too.
And that resilience is going to be seriously tested in the next chapter of the story because, well, the dot-com crash is just the beginning of the challenges LoudCloud is going to face.
Yeah, things are about to get really tough for them. Buckle up.
So where we left off, Horowitz and his team are, well, they're in a pretty tough spot.
Yeah. The dot-com bubble has burst, and their big idea for cloud computing, it just isn't working.
Most of their customers, these dot-com startups, they're going belly up left and right. And the whole market's just not ready for what they're offering.
Like, imagine being ahead of your time. You've got this amazing technology, the vision, everything, but the timing is totally off.
And they're hemorrhaging money, right? So what do you do when you're basically staring down the barrel of bankruptcy?
Well, you got to adapt. You got to pivot. And that's exactly what Horowitz does. He looks at what they've got and realizes their software, this thing called Opsware that they built to manage their own cloud infrastructure, that could actually be a standalone product.
So instead of offering the whole suite of cloud services, they decide to focus on just the software piece.
Right. And remember, this is all happening while they're a public company. So they've got investors breathing down their necks, analysts watching their every move.
It's got to be intense, making that kind of change with everyone scrutinizing your every decision.
Totally. But Horowitz knows it's their only shot. They need to convince the market that Opsware is the future of, IT management.
And they need to do it fast. But before they can go all in on Opsware, they got to figure out what to do with their existing cloud services business.
Yeah.
The thing that's losing them all this money.
Yeah. They need to find a buyer, and quickly. And this is where you see Horowitz's focus on people, even in the middle of this crisis. He reaches out to Michael Ovitz, the Hollywood super agent.
Hey, Michael Ovitz, the guy who founded CAA. Talk about connections.
Exactly. He asks him for advice on how to handle this sale, how to negotiate it.
Okay, so what does a Hollywood power broker know about selling a tech business?
Well, Ovitz emphasizes something that's easy to forget in a crisis. Treat the people leaving fairly. Like, don't just focus on the bottom line. Think about the human cost.
Right, because how you treat people, even when things are falling apart, it says a lot about you as a leader.
Exactly. And Horowitz gets it. He makes sure the departing employees are taken care of. They get generous severance packages. Everything's done with respect.
And that earns him a ton of loyalty from the team that stays. It's a powerful lesson. Even when you're fighting for survival, you got to remember the people.
And that focus on people pays off as they shift gears to build up Opsware. It's a good product, but it needs work, like a lot of work.
So they're rebuilding the software, making it user-friendly, trying to convince everyone this is the solution for all their data center problems. And to lead the charge, Horowitz brings in Mark Cranny to run sales.
Oh, yeah, Mark Cranny. This guy is a legend, like super tough, no nonsense, gets things done.
He really whips the sales organization into shape, instills this culture of, discipline and accountability.
And it works. They start closing deals, momentum starts to build. But then, just when things seem to be turning around, new challenges pop up.
Of course, because that's how it always goes, right?
New competitors like Blade Logic enter the picture. Now they're fighting to defend their market share. It's this constant struggle to stay ahead.
It's like you climb one mountain and there's another one right behind it. How do you even keep going with all this pressure?
Horowitz talks about the importance of focus, especially when things are chaotic. As the CEO, he's got to keep everyone on track, keep them motivated, make sure they're all rowing in the same direction.
That's like captaining a ship in a storm. You
Yeah.
need a steady hand at the helm.
Exactly. And he realizes they need to make some bold moves. So he decides to completely revamp the Opsware product again. He pushes the team to innovate, to build something truly amazing.
And that's where the whole Tangram acquisition comes in, right?
Yes. This was a really risky move, one that his team initially advised against. They thought it was too much, too dangerous.
But Horowitz sees something they don't.
Yeah, he realizes Tangram has this key technology that'll give them a huge edge over the competition.
So he goes for it, trusting his gut even when the data says maybe not.
And it's a game changer. This acquisition helps them land a massive deal with EDS, a giant in the IT world.
It's like a perfect example of strategic thinking, being willing to take a chance, and having a clear vision for the future.
And remember John Nelly, the CFO of Tangram. He was diagnosed with brain cancer right as the acquisition was happening.
Yeah, that was heartbreaking. I can't imagine what he and his family were going through.
So Horowitz finds out that because of his pre-existing condition, Nelly wouldn't be covered under Opsware's health insurance plan.
Oh, wow. So the cost of treatment would have been astronomical. What did he do?
He decided to personally cover Nelly's healthcare costs. It ended up costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's an incredible act of compassion, especially in the middle of all this business chaos. It shows that he truly cared about people, not just profits.
And later on, he gets this letter from Nelly's wife thanking him for saving their family from financial ruin.
Wow. It's a good reminder that sometimes the biggest victories aren't about money or deals, but about making a real difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of victories, the story of Opsware culminates in this intense bidding war between HP and BMC, two tech giants battling it out to buy this company Horowitz built.
It's like a high-stakes poker game. And after a ton of back and forth, a few near disasters, they finally sell to HP for a whopping $1.65 billion.
Talk about a success story. They went from the brink of collapse to a billion-dollar exit.
It really shows what you can accomplish with the right leadership, a little bit of luck, and a whole lot of perseverance.
And while selling the company was a huge accomplishment, it was also kind of bittersweet, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, for sure. You pour your heart and soul into something, it's hard to let it go. But, it's also the start of a new chapter for Horowitz.
Exactly. He takes everything he's learned, all the wisdom, and starts a venture capital firm to help other founders navigate their own hard things.
And he's still sharing his insights today, mentoring the next generation of entrepreneurs.
But before we wrap things up, let's dig into some of the key leadership principles he lays out in the book. Things that anyone can apply, whether you're running a company or just trying to navigate your own career.
Okay, so we've talked about Horowitz's journey. Berkeley, Silicon Valley, the whole roller coaster ride of building and selling companies. But this book is more than just his story, right?
Right. It's packed with, actual advice on leadership, stuff he learned going through all those crazy experiences.
And one thing that really jumps out is how much he emphasizes honesty, like even radical honesty. He's all about CEOs just telling it like it is, no matter what.
He says honesty is the best way to build trust, even when the news is bad. It helps you make better decisions in the long run.
And he actually gives this example of having to deliver some really tough news to his team, like something nobody wanted to hear.
And instead of sugarcoating it, he just laid it all out there, told them exactly what was going on.
And what happened?
They actually responded well. Because they knew he was being straight with them, they were able to come together and figure out a solution.
It's like people can handle the truth, but they can't handle being lied to or kept in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties into another one of his big principles. Take care of the people, the products, and the profits in that order.
I love that. It's so simple, but it totally changes how we think about business, right?
Yeah.
Putting people first, even ahead of the bottom line.
He got that from Jim Barksdale. And it basically means, create a work environment where people feel valued, supported, like they can actually thrive, because that's how you build a great company.
Makes sense. If you want to attract and keep great people, you can't just treat them like cogs in a machine, right?
Yeah.
You got to create a culture where they can grow.
And that leads us to another thing. Horowitz is really passionate about training. He believes it's absolutely essential. Not a nice to have, but a must have.
He actually made management training mandatory at Opsware. Everyone had to go through it no matter how much experience they had.
Yeah, because it's not just about learning specific skills. It's about creating this shared language, this common understanding of what good leadership looks like.
And that's something we can all think about in our own jobs, right?
Yeah.
Are we taking advantage of opportunities to learn and grow? Are we pushing ourselves to get better?
It's a good reminder that learning shouldn't stop just because we're out of school. It's a lifelong thing.
Okay, there's this other concept in the book that I found really interesting. It's called management debt.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's kind of like technical debt, but it applies to, like, the decisions we make as managers.
Can you break that down for us? I think some people might not be familiar with that idea.
It's basically the idea that sometimes we make decisions as leaders that seem like a good idea in the moment, but they end up having, like, these negative long-term consequences.
He uses this analogy of putting two people in the box. Like, say you've got two amazing employees, both deserve a promotion, but you only have one spot open.
Right, so you try to get clever and make them both co-managers, thinking you've solved the problem.
But as Horowitz points out, it almost always backfires. It creates confusion about who's in charge, who's responsible for what, and ultimately it just makes everyone's job harder.
It's a perfect example of how a quick fix can create bigger problems down the road.
It reminds us to really think through the potential consequences of our decisions. Not just what works right now, but what's going to be best for the team in the long run.
And that brings us back to, I think, the biggest lesson of the book. The hard thing about hard things is that there are no easy answers, no magic formulas.
It's all about navigating complexity, making tough choices, and being willing to learn from our mistakes.
And remembering that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, empowering your team, creating a space where everyone can do their best work.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from it?
If I had to choose one, it'd be this. Leadership is a journey. It's not about reaching some endpoint. It's about constantly learning, growing, pushing yourself to be better.
And it's about embracing the hard stuff, because that's where the real growth happens.
Exactly. And as you go back through your notes, think about this. What's one area where you could be more courageous, more honest, more willing to lean into the challenges?
That's a great question to leave everyone with. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.